Whenever the conversations around the pub, clubs and workplaces of Stoke-on-Trent turn to the city's achievements, it's only a matter of time before one man's name takes center. For 2 decades, his influence tried football club, languishing at the bottom of the second division, into one of the country's most exciting contributors to the national game, where a superior class of entertainment, performed by a team of sparkling celebrities, where results and competition successes, while being important, were in his case only pursued in order to perpetuate the glorious atmosphere with his undying allegiance and respect, not only for the game itself, but equally for his team supporters evinced at the Victoria Ground. His were Stoke City's halcyon days, an era that has already become part of the city's heritage and will fondly be regarded forevermore as the Waddington years.
As a person, Tony Waddington was brilliant. As a manager, he was even better. I mean, I think this football club owes everything to Tony Waddington, from the build-up to how it is now. And we'll just go forward from here. But Tony, I think it's time for anyone who was a football supporter who would like to talk football and mix with football. I always remember him on a train coming from London and come out of the compartment to talk to 3 Liverpool supporters who'd been down to watch England. And he'd got a seat, gave his seat up and just stood talking to the Liverpool supporters, which proved to me what sort of person he would be mixed with anyone.
I learned my reporting in Birmingham, and often my old colleagues used to phone up and say, what could I find to write about, writing just about one club. But it was easy because with Tony you never knew what he was going to do, but he was always going to do something. And he was always using their experience. I'm not sure that the Potteries really appreciated at the time what he did. They probably do more now, looking back at the football that was played during his era.
Stoke-on-Trent has been host to a number of famous people. Josiah Wedgwood helped create the pottery industry here in the late 18th century. Arnold Bennett, one of the great English novelists and author of Anna of the Five Towns, was born here, as was Reginald Mitchell, designer of the Spitfire aircraft. Captain Edward Smith was also born here. He later became commander of the ill-fated Titanic. In more recent years, we could add the name of Tony Waddington to this list for his contributions to Stoke City Football Club, as well as being an ambassador to the city, spreading the word of Stoke around the world.
Tony Waddington started his football career with Manchester United as one of their original youth brigade. He was a promising 14-year-old local hero who looked set for a long, successful playing career, but while serving in the Navy during the Second World War as a telegraph operator on HMS Hound, his chances of stardom as a player were brought to an abrupt end, following complications with a knee operation. Despite being told not to play again, he continued for the first 5 post-war years, turning out regularly as captain for Crewe Alexandra, until finally his other knee also received an injury, putting an end to his playing career once and for all. In 1952, Arthur Turner, who was manager during Waddington's time at Crewe, became assistant to the then Stoke manager Frank Taylor, and persuaded him to take Waddington on as a coach to strengthen their youth team, and in doing so, quite unobtrusively, began a term of employment that was to become a sporting legend. Tony Waddington was now on the staff of Stoke City Football Club.
From 1939 onwards to 1950, I played for Stoke. Tony managed me. It was more or less a local team, and then Tony started, and he did very well for himself, Tony. Yeah. Sometimes we used to go together and present prizes, and he was a good lad to be with, nice, he was a successful person. He did very well for them, but it didn't affect him. He's natural, you know. Oh, he was well liked, Tony.
I left Crewe on the Friday, and I was very, very fortunate in moving from Crewe as a player and going to Stoke City, who were a first division club, and going to a big club like that the following Monday. And a new regime took over in the form of a person named Frank Taylor, an ex-Wolverhampton player, and Arthur Turner as his assistant. And I was a kind of third party that joined in. And it seemed to me as if, you know, the club was really buzzing and wanting to, you know, to achieve success and so on. And my responsibility was to deal with mainly the younger side of the playing staff. So the whole emphasis from my side of the thing was to bring on younger players, to introduce younger players, and we had quite a fair amount of success in that respect.
We're here underneath the Boudin End stand when Tony, in his early days at the club, was coach and trainer. We used to spend a lot of afternoons, extra hours, so you could and always seemed to have the ball on the string. And consequently, everybody improved, where probably today it seems more of a game for athletes, probably better ball players than those days.
Waddo started when I started, and Tony trained me at night, Tuesday and Thursday, and funnily enough, as I sort of got on, Tony got on. He was like taking the A-team when he first started. I was in the A-team. I got in the reserves and he was the reserve team trainer. Got in the first team and he was looking after the first, and then he was the manager, you know. He was a bit of a con man, but in a nice way. Just con you into believing in yourself, you know. And you always just give them about 100-yard start over the hills, you know, at Trenton. And everyone I passed had to go back in the afternoon because he knew I'd pass them all. They used to get on to me for doing it, the players. You know, they were back in the afternoon anyhow. It was just geeing us up, you know, it was good.
The whole thing, unfortunately, it didn't correspond with the success of the first team, and things didn't really get very much better, and it came about that Frank Taylor in fact was dismissed, and Arthur Turner had already left to join Birmingham. The chairman at that particular time was a Mr. Gordon Taylor, who was managing director of G. Percy Trentham's, and he was a stickler for things being done by the book and so on. I'd been running the club more or less for some months and what have you, but he was insisting on the fact that I should put in an application. So the night of the board meeting comes along when they're going to determine who is going to be the manager. And as the board meeting is about to start, Mr. Henshaw, who is the vice chairman, he came down to see me in my office and gave me a pen. He said, now write, I apply for the job as manager at Stoke City Football Club. Finish. Now he said, do that or else. With that I signed the thing, and about half an hour later I was appointed as manager. Well, I was fortunate insofar as I'd moved around an awful lot, and I was pretty, you know, conversant with everything that was going on, especially around the Midlands. And you got various managers. I mean, Joe Mercer, manager of Aston Villa, and he was the first call I received the following morning, and he said, Tony, just ringing, he said, to congratulate you. He said, you'll do a marvellous job, but good luck and all the rest of it. And he said, listen, don't trust anybody. Listen, he said, don't trust anybody. And he said, when I've put this phone down, don't trust me either. That was Joe.
I always found it a pleasure, actually, and a privilege to know that I was possibly well, I was the first player Tony signed when he became manager of Stoke City. It was quite an honour. I really didn't know a great deal about Stoke City Football Club when I left Everton, and I didn't really know what I was sort of coming into. Stoke weren't doing terribly well at the time when Tony took over, and things just got better as we went along. The first year here with Tony was quite a struggle, because we're talking about a system and 4-2-2s and all that sort of thing. I think we played 1-9-1. It was practically built on defensive and breakaways, because we didn't have a great lot up front at the time, and then things started to pick up after the second year at Stoke, and Tony brought in one or two more players, the likes of Jackie Moody and Denis Pilot, and players like that started to come along, and we ended up having possibly one of the best sides Stoke ever had.
Denis Pilot, he was special, you know. So sharp, you know. I learned you pick up things off good players, you know. I mean, he used to be in goal, and he could knock your fingers back before he'd put your hands up, you know, because he had no backswing. He was that quick. I can't understand how Waddle got him. He was only little, you know. He was a great player.
I'd gone to watch a player at Stockport who really didn't impress, and by half-time I was getting ready to depart, and I had a friend there who was their commercial manager at Stockport, a chap named Jack Connors, who had been a player and who I'd known as a player. And he collared me and he said, where are you off? And I said, well, you know, I don't fancy this lad. And he said, well, look, come and look at my stuff that I've got here. And he took me down into his office and showed me all the paraphernalia that goes with the running of a lottery. And he said, this is making us a fortune. We pay so much out every week. There's an automatic winner because it's drawn out. There's a ticket there. He said it's absolutely made for football clubs and the supporters. So I went back with this, and I set the ball rolling, and in no time we had got 3 sweepstakes going, not 1 but 3. And the money from that, from those, I mean, we were making 15,000 a sweep. So that was 45,000 a week we were picking up. And that was an incredible amount of money, to say the least. But that was one of the ways that I was able to raise money to buy more expensive players and gradually build up. We were over in Turkey, in Istanbul, and sitting down having a cup of coffee, and this old lady, a very old lady, was a fortune teller. And she sat down and she said it was very, very interesting that there was very much evidence of success. There would be a person associated with that success, and he would play an important part. And that person was an old man from the sea. An old man from the sea, she said. He would be the person that would get you towards this goal. And of course that was Stanley Matthews.
As the years went by, you could see what Tony was aiming for. He was aiming for to get Stoke back on the map, because they'd gone through quite a lean spell in the 50s and possibly even in the 40s, and you could see that Tony was very keen to put Stoke City on the footballing map by bringing in the likes of Matthews and Moody and Violets and people like that, and they came to Stoke with big reputations, and their reputations didn't fail them when they got here, because they did very well.
At the end of my first game for Stoke, it was at Norwich. I wondered what I'd let myself in for. We were hammered. I think it was 6-0, and you know, I'd left a successful club like Burnley, and here I was in the second division, and you know, on a losing side. The only consolation was at the end of it, I heard Tony on the radio saying that he was pleased with the way I played. It was a terrible day, really, because all the sports press were there, hoping for big things, with the right wing being Matthews and McIlroy. You know, I don't know what they expected, but they were all there in force, and of course we didn't do anything. But thankfully after that we had a good run, and we got promotion. I'll always remember the game that sealed the promotion for us. It was against Luton. And that day, Stoke went up into the first division, and Luton, they were relegated. But we were winning 1-0, and the game could have gone either way. And then about 10 or 15 minutes from the end, I remember picked the ball up in midfield, and was fiddling about with it. And out of the corner of my eye, I noticed Matthews streaking for goals. I couldn't believe it to see Stan streaking for goals. So I whipped the ball over the fullback's head, putting Stan in the clear, and he just waltzed around the keeper and tapped it into the net, and that move sealed promotion for Stoke. It was a marvellous day for me, for all the players. We were paraded in the director's box, if I remember rightly, before the thousands of fans cheering and all excited. But there was one man missing, Tony Waddington. And although the crowd chanted and called for him to appear, I'm certain he didn't. And you know, just for that action, Tony went up in my estimation, because it's very easy for a manager or a player to wallow in the adulation of the fans when things are going well, but in football, 6 months later you can be a villain, as many managers have found out. And I think that Tony stayed out of it that day, because for one thing he let the players take all the credit, and for another, he was wise enough to know that the same thing could happen to him.
We had reached the centenary year of the club being formed. The club was 100 years old, and to celebrate that, the game was arranged for us to play Real Madrid. And in effect, we had a fabulous gate, and we covered all our expenses, and they lasted for a couple of days because we invited every club chairman in the country and his assistant, and we had all the top people staying for a couple of days in Stoke-on-Trent, and we finished up making £12,000 out of the whole business, so it was extremely successful. But more successful was it from the point of view of setting a kind of a Stoke City versus Real Madrid, which rippled away to all parts of the footballing world. And I think a lot of our standing was built upon that particular game. We were creating what I considered our own class of football, which meant more and more the ball was being used and passed and so on. And the players that we had were all able to achieve that because they were good players, they were great players.
So I started watching Stoke in 56, but I joined them in 62, 63. And that's when Stoke got promotion now to the second division, to the first. And when I first come into the ground, like I was in awe of players like, you know, Denis Violet, Jackie Moody, Stanley Matthews, you know, Eddie Clamp, Eddie Stewart, and it was just from being a schoolboy and watching the side play, and then actually coming in and starting cleaning the boots and, you know, cleaning dressing rooms as such. It was just like a pleasure to be amongst those players. I mean, the thing I always remember is like he brought a lot of players who people actually thought they're over the top, and yet Tony actually got the best out of them. You know, they come to Stoke and like, you know, Harry Gregg and people like that. There were so many players, and he got the best out of them.
Again, looking back, you find that there's an awful lot of things happen that it's just as well spectators don't know too much about, really. I mean, for instance, as soon as the season ends, the ground is generally dug over and again reseeded and so on. But on this particular occasion, I came down to the ground one morning to find that the ground was invaded by blinking sheep. And I thought, what the hell, have we been overrun or something? And I went down, investigated and so on, and Mr. Taylor, who was a farmer, as well as being the chairman, he had decided that it would be like another field, the ground at Stoke, and he'd get the sheep on like he always did, and so on. And oh my God, did we have trouble? Because what they used to do was used to lie on the side and rub the sides and burn the grass off. So we'd got great big bare patches all over the ground. And it was quite some time before I managed to persuade the chairman of the club that, no, horses for courses, but not blinking sheep for football grounds.
Very hard as a young man, you know, leaving your hometown and coming to another one, and wondering if you'll be accepted by these people. I was terrified, and I remember the first time I got into the first team, I thought, what would the crowd say, how would they react to me? And to my amazement, they stood up and cheered. 30,000 people, I've never seen so many people in my life. And Mr. Stanley took me down onto the pitch, ran out with him, he says, come on son, come down this corner, let's warm up together. And I remember his words to this day. He said, these people are just waiting for a hero to come along, he says. They need a hero, they need a centre forward that can score goals, and you could be that man. And if you can do that job for them, they'll never forget you and they'll follow you forever. And I can honestly say, I think I did a reasonable job at that. And Sir Stanley's words came true. That crowd followed me, and they did everything. They made me feel 7 foot tall, not 6 foot. And I was so proud to go out and wear that shirt for them. That was my start in football, and I never thought that I'd spend 12 or 13 years at Stoke City. But I did. I met some wonderful people. Not just the players. I remember people like Albert Henschel, the chairman. Marvellous. Mr. Crowe, surgeon at City General. These were directors and wonderful people. Percy Axon. Then we came Tony Waddington, who signed me. Wonderful chap. Did a great deal for Stoke City. I wonder if people really do remember how much he did for Stoke City. I was aware that just before I signed that I think the crowds are averaging about 3,000 or 4,000. And when he left, I think they're averaging something like 35,000. He was a fantastic chap. The club has progressed so much. We've got a magnificent stadium now. Still, after all those years, the magnificent support stays there. And as I said previously, if you give this crowd the chance to cheer and support you and try your hardest, do what you can for them, they'll always be there to support you. And that is apparent now, even after 30 years in this city. I think they're a fantastic club and a fantastic bunch of people. And I wouldn't have missed it for £1 million.
Coming from Stoke, it was very special for me to be involved with Tony Waddington, especially in the early days. I joined the club in '63 as a schoolboy, and found Tony always then very interested in what was going on with the amateurs and the reserves. I've actually played in the reserves as an amateur, which is very unusual, but Tony gave you those opportunities. I always thought that if Tony Waddington could say you can play, then you're a good player. I thought he was a very good judge of player, and I think that was proven by not only his signings of some of the older players, but the way that he brought some of the young lads on, like myself, John Marsh, Mickey Bernard, Alan Brewer, Mickey Pedgick, all these players who came in as young players. People tend to think of Tony Waddington as a buyer of old, mature players, but he also developed a lot of local talent, which was extremely good. He would say, okay, you can defend, you win it, you give it to somebody who can pass. So you'd have defenders, you'd have people in the midfield like your George Eastoms, your Peter Dobbins, and up front, from Denis Violet up through Roy Vernon, John Ritchie, there was always somebody who could put the ball in the net. At the other end, he had good passers, good defenders, good goalkeeper.
If looking for outstanding players during my particular period of time, I've got to say there are quite a number of them, and it would not really be fair to single any one particularly as a outstanding, player and this and that. The other. But of course there are little exceptions to that, and of course it goes without saying that Gordon Banks has got to be one of them, because Gordon was a tremendous professional, an absolutely fantastic goalkeeper, and a great Stoke City fan, because when he came to Stoke, I'll never forget, the manager of Leicester at the time took me to one side and said, Tony, he said, I'm afraid you've got some competition. He said, there's a number of clubs been on the phone. And he said, I'm sorry, but there's nothing I can do about this. He said, as a matter of fact, Bill Shankly's on the phone now. And you don't want to let him go to Stoke City and all that. What good can they do him and so on? But he said, I'm not letting anybody get near him until you come to me and say, it's all off, or it's all on. That's all I want to know. And he left us to it. And I went to Gordon, and I said, Gordon, the first thing I want to tell you is this. Since our discussions on Friday, there's been a number of clubs, top clubs, the very top clubs have been chasing you. They wanted to see if they could sign you. He said, hey. He said, what have you done? Have you changed your mind? I said, changed my mind about what? He said, about signing me. I said, no, I haven't. I said, look, that's the way I am. I want to be fair. I don't want you to come up to me in a couple of weeks' time and say, Tony, why didn't you tell me Liverpool had come in for me? I said, I'm telling you now, Gordon, there are various other clubs that have made an approach for you. Now, I'm merely telling you this for your information. He said, come on, let's get it signed. He went and signed there and then, and he came into the dressing room at Stoke, and everybody knew him, of course, and he just said, well, you all know me. He said, now look, I've not come here just to sit back and enjoy myself. I think this club are going to win things, and I think this club is good enough to win things. And he said, I don't want anybody to think I've just come here to mess about. And that's how he played, and he was tremendous.
I think, looking back, how I came to sign for Stoke City is a pretty long and drawn-out story. At the age of 19, I got a chance to join Glentoran, which meant turning part-time professional, and they played in the Irish League in Belfast. However, another string to Tony's bow was the fact that George Eastham's father, George Eastham Senior, was manager up in the north of Ireland of a club called Ards, and so he had a chance to monitor my progress from time to time, and he was regularly in touch with Tony about how I was doing. There came a time then when the club, Glentoran, came to me and said that they'd had an offer from Fulham, and they'd accepted terms from Fulham, and it was just up to me to discuss personal terms with the manager. However, George Eastham Senior was on the hotline to Tony to say, well look, you better get something done, because it's likely that lad is going to move on to Fulham if you don't sign him. So Tony Waddington came over to watch me play, and unfortunately, or fortunately, wherever way you want to look at it, the game was called off because of bad weather. And I was making my way back down to Dublin at Belfast rail station, and who came along when Tony Waddington introduced himself, and nowadays it would be regarded as obviously an illegal approach, but for the 2 hours that we travelled down to Dublin, Tony obviously sold me the idea of joining Stoke City, and by the time I got off the train I was convinced that Stoke was the place I wanted to go, even though I'd never ever seen the place, and basically I'd only heard of it obviously through the exploits of Stanley Matthews and other players. He then had to speak to my father, who was obviously full of admiration for Tony Waddington, and he, in no time at all, he felt that it was the best move for me to do was to turn down the Fulham offer and to join Stoke. So I made my way over to Stoke City in March 1967 to sign on the dotted line and to obviously take off on a new career for me. In the first couple of days I stayed here, I was put into a hotel which really was a flea pit, to put it mildly, and I had very, very strong visions of me actually returning home to my family and saying, I can't stick it, I'm homesick and the accommodation isn't the best. However, a stroke of luck, they came across a landlady who just lives across the road from the ground, and Mrs. Kate Cope and her husband Joe, who took me in and treated me as one of their own, and really from then I never looked back.
When Teddy first came and the other boy, they said, well, what do we do? Tell us what we do and what we don't do. I said, well, you treated us home. From now on, I'm your Stoke mother, I said, you see. I said, and then if you don't like me, or here, you say, and you go. If I don't like you, I'll tell you the same. I never had to get rid of one. I used to say to them, I got the meal in the evening, you know, and I said, right, if the bell rings when I get in the meal, you answer the door. Well, it was understood they did. So one evening, they never offered to get up, and I said, come on, well, have you answered the door? Teddy says, you go, we're tired. So I went, and her lady stood there, and she says, is it convenient for me to look round the house, please, now? So I said, pardon? She says, is it convenient for me to look round the house? Oh, I said, I don't know what you mean. She says, well, you've got a notice in the window, house cheap for quick sale. She says, and my husband works at the Met, and he's come home and told me. So I said, I looked and I said, oh. So I went in there, but they'd gone the back way. They'd both run off. Anyway, that was that. Now, another day, I used to, you know how women wear shoes and a handbag to match? Well, I was always putting my handbag down and didn't know where it was. So they said, why don't you get a cupboard? I said, I would if you hadn't got all your things in them. But anyway, someone knocked at the door. They said, I'd like to look at that skin bag you've got in the window. I said, I don't sell handbags. She says, oh, you've got a window full. Like, not a window full, you know, when you have the sash window and you can stick. And all my bags were going for 5 shillings each. So I knew it was them again. They've done some tricks on me there, but I'm a state registered nurse, and I'd always been used to discipline, you know, and well, to me, going across there with Tony Waddington was like that, as if you'd got a head, you know, somebody that was in charge. And he had some good footballers, you know.
Well, I would say the greatest testimony really to Tony would be the teams that he put out all tried to play football. Always tried to play what I think is the right way. And, you know, he built some good sides. But I was talking a fortnight ago to John Watson, and he was talking, giving great praise to Stoke. Especially, you know, talking about the quality of football they played, you know, and in his opinion, the right way to play. Obviously, the man must have a photographic memory because he mentioned a few games. And he remembered me scoring a goal, so he must have a good memory. And he was saying, you know, that how marvellous it was for a more or less a provincial side to try and play the right way. And I would say that's Tony's greatest testimony, in as much as all the teams he built all tried to play the right way. I think he'll be remembered long after you know, some of the managers that they'll have at this club.
One of the special things about Stoke was the atmosphere that was there, especially when we had a hell of a good side and we had the good cup rooms and the booth and end was full. I mean, it was super to play. I think we played Man United in one of the cup games where we won 2-1, and, you know, the booth and end going. And as a local lad who had actually stood on the booth and end and shouted and cheered from that end, to see that crowd going and working with you and practically sucking the ball into the net, it was a fantastic experience. And the way they got behind people has been superb. And I'll never forget those years. You can't forget an atmosphere like that. I mean, I loved it. It's a shame now we're never going to have those 49,000 I think we used to get into Stoke when we had the big games. And with that sort of crowd in, and with the booth and end full, was one hell of an experience.
Very earliest impression I can remember playing here. I arrived in Stoke in '67, and I wasn't a regular until about '69. And the first time I really felt the surge or the power of the booth and end was a Boxing Day game against Notts Forest, who had a particularly strong side at that time. Terry Hennessy played, Grummet, and there were 2 or 3 other internationals. And we were losing 1-0 at the time, and in those days conditions weren't considered to be bad, but actually the ground was packed hard with solid ice, and it was difficult to walk on it, never mind to try and run and control the ball. And I remember when we were losing 1-0 and coming into the second half, and I got a ball on the halfway line, and I was an instinctive player. I didn't really think what I was going to do next, and I just ran at Terry Hennessy, and he was a little bit probably past his best at the time, so I managed to glide by him quite easily. And another defender came to me, and I weaved to the right and then to the left, and I was faced with the keeper, who was Peter Grummet, I think. And I sidestepped him, and I knocked the ball into the back of the net. It was a classical goal, really, but I didn't know how I did it. And the boot and end just rose and won, and that was the first time, as I say, I ever felt that there was something special. And the occasion obviously was special for me, but because of the time of the year, where it was, you know, Boxing Day and the festivities, it created a great atmosphere in the crowd. And we went on to win 2-1. George Eastham scored a second, and from then on, the thrill or the pleasure that players got from actually scoring in the boot and end was exceptional.
Tony cared very much for the players. He cared for their needs off the field as well as on. And I think that the players responded in that way. I think what helped him, and what I noticed considerably when I came in '69, I came from Crewe actually, and when I joined up with Tony, the first thing that struck me was the skill, ability of the players that he had around him. When you think of the calibre of Roy Vernon, Maurice Setters, Eddie Clamp, Stewart, George Eastham, Peter Dolbin, Alec Elder, all these players, you could go on, there's a list infinitum. All these players that he brought had all done it. And I think he felt that having the calibre of those players around him would make for his pure dream of what he liked to see in football, and football in general. And of course I think the UEFA Cup particularly, and the League Cup, brought out these points that we could play. Because I mean the Cup, when you win a Cup, you're the best side on the day, you're not necessarily the best side all year. But when we won the League Cup in '72, we played 15 or 16 games that particular year to win it. And we seemed to be relaxed, we seemed to be able to cope with the pressure, and we played to our full potential. And as you know, the semi-final with West Ham, the humdinger it was with a penalty in the last minute. But again, we were able to rise above that, and players were able to play to the ability that they could give their maximum, and more in that particular year.
I suppose the greatest recollection of those days was probably 1970, 71 and 72, where we were very unlucky not to get to Wembley on 2 occasions in the FA Cup, when Arsenal happened to escape our clutches on both occasions, and luckily got through to the final on both occasions. That would have created, had we got there even on one occasion, that would have created a whole different slant on the way the club went from then to the present day. I think it could have changed the whole face of Stoke City had we reached Wembley. However, we did reach Wembley in 1972, as everybody knows, in the League Cup, and that's the abiding memory that I will take to my grave with me, the fact that we were successful against all the odds. But having said that, we did deserve to win the final. We had a great side at that time, and as I said earlier, we were slightly unlucky not to have got to Wembley 3 times over the space of 2 seasons. My abiding memory of Wembley obviously is as early as the 4th minute. The ball came across me, I closed my eyes, I just happened to stick my neck out, the ball hit my head and went into the roof of the net. And people obviously said what a classical goal it was. Well, I'll put the record straight now. It was the greatest fluke of all times. But however, they all count, as they say. And obviously, the people of the Potteries who supported us that day, it was the greatest day that they'll ever have. And from the players' point of view, we'll never forget it.
Towards half-time, I think it was nip and tuck between us and Chelsea, and then obviously just before half-time we had a bad blow where Osgood got the equaliser, and they went in 1 each at half-time, which was quite a blow then, you know. I think he was quite happy with the first half performance, and obviously, as what it was like, he just said that to keep on playing your football like we had done the first half, which obviously was renowned for anyway. We weren't going to change the way we played. Second half, so we say still about even Steven in the game, and obviously one incident I did remember, that was midway through the second half when I lost my contact lens. Went down like towards the touchline, and obviously like Frankie Mountford had to go back to the dressing room and get the spare pair. I mean, that stands out in my mind. But then later on, like George Eastham got the winning goal, and I suppose that's what stands out in the final.
Mike Bernard. Greenhoff. And now Marsh. Doving. Swept wide there for Terry Conroy. Richards away to the pounce now. Conroy going past Webb. A delicate chip there, a deep one towards Ritchie. Nodded down again. And a good save. And Eastham. George Eastham. The old man has done it. And if that happens to be the winner, that really is a storybook come true. For George Eastham after Benetti had brilliantly parried Greenhoff's shot. Eastham there to round it off. And Gordon Banks, having lost 2 FA Cup finals with Leicester, now just a few seconds away from winning one with Stoke, and he's done it. Stoke have won, to the delight of their bench and their supporters, with their goals, the winning one coming from George Eastham, 35 years old, now getting the congratulations from Holland, and congratulations all round on that Stoke bench from Tony Waddington particularly, the man who has revitalised football in the Potteries. And that is going back, that cup, to the Potteries. Rest of the players getting their medals from Dr. Gustav Wiederkehr, the president of the European Football Association. Mike Bernard, who very nearly lost it all. John Marsh, who had such a good game at full-back. There's the winner, George Eastham. Mike Pedgick as well. Gordon Banks, another trophy for his sideboard. John Mahoney, the substitute, and Terry Conroy. And who can doubt that the Stoke supporters who waited so long, so very long, for something to cheer of this magnitude, why shouldn't they enjoy every possible moment of it?
Of course it's a great honour to play for your country, especially as the last line of defence. There's something even more special about your home club. There are the lads with whom you really share your hopes and dreams. But no matter what else happens, 72 will be remembered always as our year. We'll be together like birds of a feather. We'll be together come rain or shine. If we're together, whatever the weather, everything's gonna be fine. We'll be together like birds of a feather.
It was as if our name was written on the cup that year, because we were, it was a marvellous year. And then of course the tumultuous welcome we got when we came back. I mean, there must have been 250,000 people who came out that day to see the team come back, and that will always live in my memory for a long time. And I think it will live in Tony's memory for a long time, because that again was the icing on the cake. I mean, all he dreamed about, and for Stoke to win a major competition.
Looking back over that era, the club had a great identity with the people in the town. Tony was an unbelievable PR man, where he could retain the interest of the public. Every day he'd have a story in the Evening Sentinel where he would be signing some international player or whatever. And it created conversation in the pottery industries during that period of time, and 95% of the people in the town were Stoke City supporters, so it was very invaluable to have this identity or the link with the local people. Obviously as well, when we travelled abroad, it was a great attraction for European clubs, or we've even gone as far as playing in Africa and Israel to play supposedly friendly games, and the attraction from their point of view was that when they came to see a game, they could identify with the players that played. So we were really a travelling band, Stoke City was at that time, and every opportunity that Tony got to take the players abroad, whether it be end of the season, pre-season, or during the season, he obviously jumped at the opportunity, which created revenue for the club and obviously gave us a break from the day-to-day humdrums, whether it be a family or whether it be pressures of wherever you'd like to call it. In this respect as well, it was a plus for the city, because when we travelled abroad, the directors would invariably take lots of Wedgwood, Royal Dalton, Ainsley and other stuff, which kind of put the potteries on the map.
I was particularly keen on all this because not only did it give a certain amount of standing for the club, but it was improving the quality of the players that you had. They were seeing different teams playing against different players, and overall they were playing against the best. We toured South America. We played against all the top American teams down in Argentina and so on, and we came out well against those teams. So I could feel and sense that within the club we were raising our standards. And not only that, I used to take 2 of the younger players with us. And this was important, really, because when you're touring like that, you get together as a team, you knit very closely, and I was taking lads abroad and I was bringing men back.
One of the other spin-offs, I think, absolutely amazing for me, was as a young man coming from small town Kettering, up to then what I thought was a big town, Stoke, and then finding, after a little while, getting into the first team, and the next thing I'm on a plane and I'm going on a 6-week round the world trip. I mean, it's this thing you just dream about as a young man, not just playing football for a good club like Stoke. It's actually getting on a plane and going off to, I don't know, places like Russia and South America and all this. But we went on a round the world trip, and I remember one instance we was in New Zealand and we were playing a team called Dunedin. Way down, very, very cold. We arrived the night before and it was so cold in a little hotel, they hadn't got any central heating, we had to sleep in our tracksuits. But we went out the next day, determined to have a good game, still sleeting and snowing. We played this little team and we gave them a real pounding in the first half. And a lot of luck about it, but I scored 4 goals and we were winning 4-0 at half time, and the crowd getting a little bit restless. So Tony Waddington had a wonderful idea. He thought, what about putting Gordon Banks in the other goal? He announced to the crowd and they was over the moon. And he bet me $100 that I wouldn't get any more against Gordon. We finished up, we beat them 8-0 and I got all 8. And Tony Waddington still owes me $100 New Zealand dollars.
I had played at previous clubs, and whenever we went on tour, they were quite strictly organised. You always had your training kit and you were told your training times. I remember asking Tony, you know, what about the training kit? When are we going to be training? He said, we won't be training, he said, we'll be playing. And I thought, well, fair enough. But what I didn't realise was the number of times we'd be playing, because obviously the trip's got to be paid for. And as part of the, one of the rewards for the trip, we were told that after about 3.5 weeks, we were going to have 4 or 5 days holiday on a desert island, paradise desert island. We were told this by Tony and his then chairman and sidekick Albert Henschel. And we thought, this is marvellous, you know. Because we were playing in Australia and New Zealand and it was their winter. Obviously not as severe as ours, but it was still, there was a distinct lack of sunshine. And we went to a place called New Caledonia, which you've probably never heard of, but it's so remote in the South Pacific that we actually think there was still some Japanese left there from the Second World War. And when we got there, they were in the middle of a typhoon, and the sort of South Sea island paradise that we were promised turned out to be somewhat different from that. We were scheduled to play 1 game there against a local select, which was scheduled to take place on an evening. Well, we were there for 3 days and it never stopped raining, and the game still went ahead as planned. I think there was about 2 people there plus a couple of dogs, and we played the game, which was actually quite a tough game considering we hadn't played or trained rather, but we'd been enjoying ourselves as much as we could without the sunshine. Of course, we were all ready when we got back to the hotel to pack and leave the place, because there wasn't much there. Nobody spoke English. It was French speaking and a lot of natives. And we got the bad news from Tony and Albert Henschel that because the gate was so low and because we had to cover expenses and because we had to pay the hotel bill, they'd rearranged another game before we could leave, which meant staying another 2 or 3 days to get the thing organised and play again. This did not go down too well. What became was to be our rest and relaxation turned into a week's nightmare and so-called paradise. But looking back on it, we had a lot of laughs over that particular incident, and of course from then on it was laughs all the way. Because the one thing that you got when you went on tour with Tony was a lot of laughs. He always looked after you. I mean, the training thing was, in actual looking back on that, was was a good idea because we were travelling so much and playing so much, he actually didn't have time to train. It was marvellous on tour.
Allied to travelling around all over the place, as I say, and whatnot, we were building up relationships with various countries, as I say, Real Madrid, Portugal and people like that. And we, in fact, were one of the originators of the Anglo-Italian Cup competition. And we finished up playing our stint over there in Italy. We were playing Roma on one occasion, and we in fact did extremely well, and I think we won the game, and afterwards there was all kinds of problems with the crowd, but it wasn't to do with us, it was to do with their president. They wanted a new president and so on. But there were riots and there was tear gas and this, that and the other. And I can remember going into the dressing room at the end of the game, and I thought everybody would be happy as anything there. They were all sat crying there. And what it was tear gas that the soldiers had fired all over the place, you know. And partly as a result of that, there was a person named Rothenberg. Mr. Rothenberg used to arrange our travels, but the next day, on the Sunday, Mr. Rothenberg, had arranged for the chairman and myself, Mr. Henshaw, to go to see the Pope. And we had quite some time speaking to the Pope, and who was very knowledgeable about what was going on, about football in general and this and that and the other. And he said to me, particularly, it was important that I get the message over to the players that they do nothing on the field that's going to antagonize or in any other way that's going to create problems where the younger people have got something to latch onto to say, but he did it playing for Roma on Sunday and so. Make sure that your players are so well behaved that they don't give any kind of opportunity for young people to go out there and imitate them. And quite frankly, that was some 10 or 15 years before all the aggravation had begun to start in all the countries where you're getting this kind of reaction at the end of games and so on. I myself feel that there's too much hype put on the games in itself, that they're made far too serious in every shape and form, and that football is still, and should be always, is still a sport. And yet, the way it's being conducted at times is like a war. It's like a battle. And this is where football has got to look into its own particular background to find out some way has got to be stopped from hooligans invading the pitches and so on.
Well, I think the players Tony signed, they could only play one way. You know, they couldn't play defensively. I mean, he signed quality players that could only play the skillful way. You know, they played with complete freedom. You know, that's what I'll always remember about Waddo. I mean, he never put his players under pressure to play defensively. I mean, today, your managers, all they ever talk about is the opposition. Whereas Tony only talked about the way we're going to play. And I think that's one of the major reasons why the game's gone sort of so stereotyped. I was always a big Stoke supporter, so obviously Stoke were my club, and to play under Tony Waddington was obviously my ambition. You know, I saw the type of football they played. I think the emphasis was always on the skill side of the game, which was a bonus for me, you know. And when I eventually played in the first team, all my dreams came true. And in fact,
I still couldn't believe I was playing alongside my heroes, you know. I mean, when I was a supporter, I was worshipping the players I eventually played alongside. And it was the best part of my career, you know, I must admit.
Well, I think it's fair to say that Tony Waddington was ahead of his time. For a young black lad in the town of Stoke to be given the opportunities that I was given at that time, I think was not only brave of him, but was typical of the man. Legend has it that I was the boy that broke his window. Well, at that time I was prepared to do anything to get his attention. It's not exactly true. I certainly was the boy that used to kick the ball outside the ground, and the late Len Parton was there telling me off. But he was also the man who gave me my first opportunity of getting onto the Victoria ground in one of the close seasons and allowed me to sort of kick the ball into an empty net, and it was at the boothing end, and I was always a boothing ender from the ages of 11 to 16, when I actually signed for the club. But that first taste of playing at the Victoria ground or being on the pitch and hitting the back of the net with a small plastic ball was part of the whole thing of me badgering them to let me be a part of my team as I saw it. My house was in 16 Butler Street, which anyone living in Stoke will know is a stone's throw from the ground, at the Stoke end of the ground. And when I got the chance, Tony took me under his wing, and if he hadn't have taken me under his wing and nurtured me through and protected me to a large degree from some of the more unsavoury aspects of the professional game, then my career might not have been. So I'm eternally grateful to the Wad.
With all transfer deals, there's always the little asides that develop before, sometimes afterwards. I mean, I agreed to sign Osgood, with Osgood. He shook hands with me, and then he said, well, I promised to go and see Laurie McMenemy down in Southampton. I said, what the hell do you want to go there for? He said, just to tell him. He said, I promised I would tell him, and I said, I don't like breaking a promise. I said, look, if you go from here, we've just agreed everything. I said, if you go, you'll sign. He said, no, no way, no way. So I said, okay. And as he went out through the door, I said, see you then, good luck, ta-da. And I wrote him off there and then, and he signed for Southampton. Of course, in those days, I mean, whilst I signed Peter Chilton for 240,000 quid, that was an awful lot of money. There were lots of other deals that went through, as I say, Jimmy, signed Jimmy, you know, for £100,000, Jimmy Greenhoff. Hoddy cost a lot more, but deals, you know, come and go like this, and it so happened by coincidence that I was selling a player to Malcolm Allison. He started off by saying about the lad, and he fancied him a bit, you know, and I'd got in the back of my mind a fee of about 25,000. So I said, well, Malcolm, look, you've just had him for a month, you must know how much. He said 50,000. So I said, Malcolm, put another 10 on that and you can have him. I sold him for 60, and I was quite prepared to let him go for 25. But that's how deals happen. You don't know quite what's in the other person's mind. And we had a chat about various players, and I said, I'm just manoeuvring now to get in the right position to sign Alan Hudson. He said, Alan Hudson? No chance, he said. Alan Hudson? He wouldn't step out of blinking London. By 10 yards, he said, no, Tony, he said, great player. absolutely the best, but he said, he ain't got a catching else chance. A fortnight later, I'd signed him.
I was telling somebody the other day, and reading the papers about how players are signing now for big money, and everybody's going for what they can get out of them. Good luck to them. But I remember the time, the greatest thing I can say, obviously about yourself, is when Tony first signed me. He never talked about money. All he talked about was the great players he'd signed. The George Eastons, the Denis Violets, your Roy Burns.
They loved Denis Violet.
I know he did, yeah. He liked him more than me, didn't he?
Yeah.
And obviously yourself, you know, and he mentioned 5 names, and I just went back home. I mean, I had no, although I was a little bit young at the time, and I used to watch you play, obviously when you used to come down for Leeds at the bridge and that, I just went home to my father and I said, I just spoke to Mr. Waddington in Stoke. My dad just turned around and said, sign for the man. Just do it. He says the man's he's a genius. And I've never seen my father ever, feel so proud to meet a man as when he met Tony. And not only did he do it for the first time, even after when I played against Germany and all that, I've seen in the presence of Dave Sexton and all the big managers, Tommy Docherty, and my father would not really be bothered about them. But to be in Tony's company, and I think that told the story.
Yeah, never put anything on, did he at all?
No.
So was a players, man. He was one of the boys, really. Great at man management. Allowing you to play football. And I think he saw that in you, just let that lad play football. He'll make his stick, and obviously he did. I have to say to many people that they couldn't believe when I said we used to play with his eyes.
Yeah.
And we just used to look at one another, and the old eyes would go left or right or short, and the ball was there from you. I could run away 15 yards forward, and as I turned to come back, the ball was already there. It was a wonderful time, Alan.
I think looking on the funny side of it, I think how the other players reacted. I remember times when you get the ball, and it might have been Jimmy Robbo on the right wing or something, and I'd get the ball in midfield, and I knew where it was going to go before anyone tried to close you down or whatever. And I'd just look at Jimmy, and Jimmy would go like that, and he's got like 5 yards to take the ball back on, and just as I go to knock at him, I've knocked it into you, and Jimmy would go, it was just telepathic, wasn't it?
That's right. I mean, Alan, when we used to play Leeds United, and Norman Hunter was a great marker, great footballer. And every time you got the ball, he says, come on Jimmy, when are you going for it? When are you going for it? And all of a sudden I'd gone, because I knew that the ball would be released before he knew.
Yeah.
That a great player like that knew what understanding we had together.
It was a very rare relationship, wasn't it?
We had a player called Eric Skeels, who was a great lad, and on the field he would do anything. He'd go in goal if you asked him to. But on this particular game we were playing Leeds, and I'm not actually sure, but it may well have been the time when Leeds had gone undefeated. They'd gone right through the season till February, and they came to us. And so we said to Eric, right, when we play Leeds, Giles is obviously going to create a few problems. So Eric, you sit on him, and when he starts trying to do the business, you obviously close him down and mark him out the game. And that's the sort of thing that Eric could do. Okay, Leeds were without Giles and we were without Eric, but obviously Leeds without Giles, they were only firing on 4 cylinders instead of 5. So in the end, I think we won 3-2. But that was applied. We could play players of that calibre if needed, and I think this was the secret of Tony's success at that particular time, that he'd got a squad together who could play. And the experienced players were obviously going to help the young players, and the young players in turn would be able to learn from that, and they would perform.
Like you said before, that he never used to rant and rave. I remember one game I wasn't playing, and he was having a bit of a go at Eric Skeels out on the park. Eric, in the meantime, had broke his small bone and was limping a little bit, but persevering in the second half and doing a great job, gritting his teeth. And Tony's up in the director's box there, phoning down to Frank Mountford on the phone in the dugout. What's the matter with Skeelsy? And he shouts out, what's the matter with Skeelsy? All right, well, time to get a move on, kind of thing. Tell him to get stuck in, tell him to get... Right, Tony, put it down. Plop, plop, it went again. Frank, Skeelsy isn't doing this. Boy, Skeelsy, get doing it, the gaffer's... Back the phone goes. In the end, Tony keeps ringing and ringing, and Frank, gets a little bit fed up of it, and by the side of the dugout is a bucket of water. And when Tony rang up again, he says, "Oh, forget it," and put the phone in the bucket of water. That's right.
That's Frank.
There was one particular game we were playing. I'm not sure whether it was in the League Cup year, but a player had got injured and the play was delayed for about 3 or 4 minutes, and Tony had rung down. He said, Alan, he said, I want to have a quick word with George, because George was playing on the wing, well, the far side. He was right in front of us by the box. So I shouted across, "George, telephone," and George comes off and he's on the phone to Tony. And Tony was passing these instructions on. I thought, well, anything goes in professional football.
To give Tony credit, he was very astute, and if you did try to argue with him, you'd never get the better of him. I like the way he used to handle players such as Peter Dobie and Jimmy Greenhoff, and I can remember Morris Nettis coming. He handled him. They thought we should have problems with them training, but there were no problems whatsoever training. Funnily enough, you could never fall out with him, except like we talked about being on the phone during the game. I couldn't fall out with him, but I just put the phone down and that was the end of it. But I do sometimes think I made a mistake throwing the phone in the bucket. Whether Tony agrees with it or not, I don't know. But we have had some good times. I remember the times when we went away to London, in such places. You always had to look after the baggage, make sure it got there, make sure it got back. You know, the 2 players, Terry Conroy and John Mahoney, were the instigators of always trying to take the mickey out of it. Very often I've seen them when I've left stranded on the station at Euston, hanging through the window, waving their arms, saying goodbye. It was nice of them, wasn't it? But nevertheless, that was the way. Well, those are the antics they used to get up to, and they were very enjoyable, actually. But I didn't enjoy the trip back to Stoke on my own with 2 big crates of luggage and training and football kit.
I can remember probably about 18 months after I came, initiation on a Monday morning in the gym of the club, and I know Tony used to have to do his calls first, but he used to like to come in the gym and get a sweat on a Monday morning. You know, he used to, 5-a-side, he used to love it. But I know you could always tell if you'd had a bad game on a Monday, because, you know, it used to get quite fierce up there, and once everybody got a sweat on, you know, it was a bit feverish, and now and again, you know, you go for a tussle, you go, "Oh, don't whack the boss," like, but he used to get you, he used to dig you, like, you know, like sharpen his elbows, so you used to think, what's the matter with him, like, and then so you realise that penny dropped, oh, he must have been too happy with my performance on Saturday, because he used to look after himself, don't you know, a little niggle there and an elbow there, but it used to get quite fierce up there, especially on a Monday, you know.
Well, we came in here on a Monday morning, particularly to get the stiffness out of limbs, but it was called the Blood and Thunder simply because it was an enjoyable time when you could get the previous Saturday's game off your mind, and if you'd been falling out with a player, one of your own players, on the Saturday you could take it out on him in here. You couldn't get away from him. Of course, he'd got big elbows, hadn't he, Tony? He got a big backside as well, actually. Put that in if you dare.
Tony's would like to play a lot of skillful football. He liked to play pure football. Sometimes it was not always easy to do that because you'd play some sides who would try and destroy you by physical means. But when we went to Ajax, we were playing against a club who was noted for pure football. And the 2 games that were played, the one at Stoke was 1 each, but the one at Ajax Amsterdam was 0-0. Now you might think, well, 0-0 was a poor game, but from an entertaining point of view, it was pure football. And after the game, when you talk with the players and the management, there was a team and officials, particularly Tony, because they could see that they taught the same language.
I know you feel, and we spoke about it many times, I feel we were the best team in the league that year. We got to the top of the league. I think we went to the top of the league probably in the January, something like that, was it, Jim?
We even went played Birmingham.
When you scored the 2 goals?
That's what I think was just before New Year, that was, or just after Christmas, wasn't it? And then we went to Leeds and got beat, but then we got ourselves back on the rail.
I think we went top of the league. I think we beat Leicester here one day, 1-0. We went top of the league. Denis Smith scored, and we never looked like we were going to get taken on. We went to Derby, who eventually won it, and we beat them 2-1. You got 2 great volleys. No, you got a great volley and a header.
And a header, that's right.
2 semi-crosses, that's right. So we beat the league champions.
That's right.
And then we were going along great. As you say, we had a hiccup at Leeds when you didn't play, when we didn't have a full side out. If we'd have won that, we'd have probably gone 4 points clear.
We went to Sheffield United and got beat 2-0. Then we came in, I think it was Newcastle 1-1 when Schultz miskicked.
Yeah.
When no one was near him really.
Yeah.
Outside the box.
Yeah, and I think I better be the one to say it, that you know, I felt that Schultz really let us down. If he'd have played like he did while he's at Notts Forest when they won the League and European Cup, he was never happy here.
No, I think that's true.
I think he
was bigger than Stoke.
Yeah.
And of course we were riding high, and somehow or other we lost 5, I think it was 5 or 6 players, all with injuries that put them out of the game virtually. I mean, George Eastham, John Ritchie, and you know, Eric Skeels. There was a number of them that just, quite frankly, after the League Cup and all that happened there, somehow we had another team. And it was a very difficult period. And when it transpired that the roof of the Butler Street stand was blown away, it meant that either the ground had to be closed or we had to quickly replace it. Now this was an awful lot of money involved, and quite frankly the way that the directors at that time saw fit to find the money was something that I was bitterly against, and that was the selling of my best players. And Jimmy Greenhoff, in fact, it was probably the most ridiculous transfer of all time, because he was extremely popular, he was a truly great player, he'd done tremendous service for the club and was still there, young enough to do it once more, and he went for just over £100,000, and he went to Manchester United and stepped straight in their first team. He even scored a goal at Wembley to win them the FA Cup. These kind of things. Eventually, Alan Hudson was transferred, and I could see that the writing was on the wall, and I gave the club an ultimatum that if they sold Pejic, I would resign. Pejic was transferred to Everton. He never cost us a halfpenny. We got something like £150,000, something like that. But the die was cast, and I said that there is no way they could stay in the First Division by selling their best players. And I said, if this is going to continue anyway, I'm just as well away. And so after 20 odd years, I just resigned, and that was it.
As a supporter and a player at Stoke City, I always remembered Tony signed quality players, but when the bank put him under pressure to sell one of his quality players, in fact I think it was Jimmy Greenhoff, I remember a comment Tony sort of directed towards the Stoke supporters. He said, you've had your caviar, now start getting used to the fish and chips. Tony was always an unselfish man. I think a good example of his unselfishness was he organised a pension for the entire first team squad, but he didn't organise a pension for himself. I think that was typical of the man.
I suppose his greatest ability was the fact that he could judge talent. Instantly he'd seen maybe a player, and he might only see him for 2 or 3 minutes, and he'd know exactly how that player would turn out to a degree. Obviously, as I said, he had to be a good judge of talents because he signed me without seeing me play. But as a man, I would say he had lots of charm. I'll give you an instance where I'm sure it applies to most of the players when they feel that they've been left out for whatever reason, or they've lost form and they're not playing, and Tony had to maybe leave the players out, and you'd obviously go in as soon as you'd been left out, steaming into the office, banging on the door, you know, brushing the secretary aside, you know, disregarding making appointments, and going in, and Tony would be sitting there behind the desk, and you'd steam into him and say, you know, what did so-and-so be letting you out for? And within 5 minutes you'd come out of the office wondering why you'd gone in the first place, because he had this ability to sit you down, you know, maybe pour you a drink if you wanted one, and then talk about everything but the reasons why you went in. And he would discuss your family, discuss, you know, how you felt yourself, but football never came into it. And he had this ability to be able to turn you away from your way of thinking and to divert you from really what your feelings were. And as I say, he'd come out 5 or 10 minutes later and you'd be apologising for going into him. And I'm sure I sum up the feelings of all the players, because I'm sure they've all gone through that situation where they've gone in and they've felt that they've been hard done by, and they've come out apologising for actually going in. So really that sums up Tony Waddington for me.
As a manager, there wasn't a better manager in the business at the time. He was a very, very good manager in the sense that he knew what he wanted, and he had a way of getting the best out of his players, which he did do. What can you say other than the man's record is there for all to see? You know, you can see the record he has, and he had a lot of success. And I'm sure, quite honestly, that the people in the potteries realised, you know, and I know how highly he was thought of in the potteries, and he stuck by the potteries. He may have even had the opportunity of going higher with maybe 1 or 2 of the more glamorous clubs, but he did choose to stay on in Stoke because I'm sure he loved Stoke City Football Club.
What I hope will not happen from now on is that people will turn around and say, well, Stoke have only won the League Cup in 100 odd years. Let's forget about 100 odd years. I'm not that old, I hope. As far as we're concerned, it's a great day for us. I think it's a great day for football too, Jim, in lots of ways, because as an example, Mr. Mears has just come in and congratulated me, and what he said was, I think, sums it all up. He said, congratulations, Tony. It couldn't happen to a nicer club. And I think that's very important, because we have a relationship with a lot of people in the game, with nearly everybody in the game, and I think this what's happened today is good for football as well as good for Stoke City.